The reading from the Hebrew Bible today comes from Exodus 14, 19 through 31. Hear these words. All this time, God's angels had gone ahead of Israel's army, but now he moved behind them. A large cloud had also gone ahead of them, but now it moved between the Israelites and the Egyptians. The cloud could give light to the Israelites, but made it dark for the Egyptians, and during the night they could not get any closer. Moses stretched out his arms over the sea, and the Lord sent a strong east wind that blew all night until there was dry land where the water had been. The sea opened up, and the Israelites walked through on dry land, with a wall of water on each side. The Egyptians, chariots and cavalry, went after them. But before daylight, the Lord looked down at the Egyptian army, and a fiery cloud made them panic. Their chariot wheels got stuck, and it was hard for them to move. So the Egyptians said to one another, "Let us leave these people alone. The Lord is on their side and fighting against us." The Lord told Moses to stretch out your arms towards the sea. The water will cover the Egyptians, the cavalry, and their chariots. Moses stretched out his arm, and at daybreak the water rushed towards the Egyptians. They turned to run away, but the Lord drowned them in the sea. The water came and covered the chariots, the cavalry, and the whole Egyptian army, and had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them was left alive. But the sea made the wall water on each side of the Israelites, so they could walk through to dry land. On that day, when the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the shore, they knew that the Lord had saved them. Because of the mighty power he had used against the Egyptians, the Israelites worshipped him and trusted him and their servant Moses. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Well, do you remember the feeling you had when your boss said you could leave work early, but you'd still get paid for the full day? Or maybe when you were in school and you had been given a special task to do, maybe taking a letter to the principal's office, and you had the rare opportunity to skip out on some class time. The feeling that you probably had within you in either of those situations is a strange mixture of excitement and joy, but also a little bit of nervousness as well. It feels too good to be true. What if your boss changes her mind? What if another teacher catches you in the hallway and doesn't believe your story and you get in trouble for not having the hall pass? I think that's just a small taste of what it would have been like for the Israelites when they were leaving Egypt. After 400 years of slavery, they could hardly believe what was happening. Did Pharaoh really say that they could leave and not come back? This had to be too good to be true. I imagine the Israelites sort of speed walking out of the land of Goshen, past Pharaoh's palace, past the ancient statues of kings and queens, through the city gates, past the pyramids that their ancestors had helped build. Off in the distance, they could see the famous statue of the Sphinx. Finally, they were out in the wilderness, far away from the city, with the Nile now several miles behind them. And yet they didn't know if they could quite breathe easily yet. All the while, they were looking back over their shoulders, expecting that at any moment Pharaoh and his army might come chasing after them, or that perhaps they might wake up and realize that this was all a dream. Some of the younger ones probably started singing and dancing, but they were quickly hushed. Don't make too much noise. We're not safe yet. But the question was, would they ever feel safe? Would they ever be able to stop looking over their shoulders? Would they ever be able to live completely free from fear when Pharaoh and his army were still out there? And then, just when they perhaps were starting to feel that they might be able to savor that sweet taste of freedom, there it was in front of them, the Red Sea. Their hearts sank. It might as well have been an ocean. How would they ever get across? They had no boats. Most of them probably didn't know how to swim. And they had all of their possessions with them. They didn't know the geography, but some perhaps thought that they could just go around. Others perhaps thought that it was an inconquerable obstacle, and they might as well just turn back around and go back to Egypt now. But finally, word spread throughout the crowd that they were going to set up camp for the night. And that's when they saw it. The small cloud of dust behind them on the horizon. Was that just me, or was that a tremor underneath our feet? They wondered. The Israelites watched in horror as the cloud of dust grew closer and larger, and then emerging from that cloud of dust, they could make out the shadowy figures of enemy chariots riding towards them. And now they could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet as the chariots approached. Shrieks of fear turned into shouts of anger as the crowd became enraged at the one who had led them out of Egypt. Moses, why did you bring us out into this wilderness just for us to be killed by Pharaoh and his army? Why couldn't you let us just remain as slaves in Egypt? The cloud that up until this point had been in front of them, leading and guiding their way, drifted behind them, blocking Pharaoh's army from view, protecting the Israelites for the time being. But the Israelites knew that Pharaoh and his army were still out there, and it was only a matter of time before they would be caught. As night fell, they knew that there was nothing they could do. Reluctantly, they lay down for the night, tossing and turning, trying to catch a few hours of fitful sleep. Surely they would be captured in the morning. The question was, would Pharaoh slaughter them right then and there, or would they be taken, disgraced and humiliated in chains, back to Egypt? For the Israelites, there was nothing they could do, nowhere they could go. The Red Sea in front of them, and Pharaoh and his army behind them. It seemed that all hope was lost. The Israelites were in a seemingly impossible situation, between a rock and a hard place. But as it has often been said, our God is the God of the impossible. And God can make a way where there is no way. Though the Israelites may have lost all hope, God still had a purpose for them, and God still had a plan. You see, while it seemed that the Red Sea was an impenetrable barrier, and perhaps even that it would be their downfall, it was in actuality the means by which God had orchestrated their salvation. You see, it was in fact God who had led them to the Red Sea. God could have led them on a different path. Not only that, but it was God that had them wait to cross the Red Sea. Earlier in chapter 14, we see that God specifically told Moses to have the people turn back. God said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Piharoth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-zephon. You shall camp opposite it by the sea." Why did God tell the Israelites to turn back rather than to keep going? Why did God have them camp right then and there in that vulnerable situation between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army? Well, we see earlier in chapter 14 that it was so that Pharaoh would say of the Israelites, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. God told Moses, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue them." God wanted Pharaoh to pursue the Israelites. God wanted Pharaoh to think that the Israelites were just wandering aimlessly around in the desert. that they would be easy prey if he were to come after them. God wanted Pharaoh to change his mind and to come chasing after the Israelites. Why in the world would God put the Israelites through this when they had been through so much already? But I believe that God knew that the Israelites would always live their lives in fear of Pharaoh's retaliation, that they would never be able to fully trust in God, that they would always be looking back over their shoulders, unless they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Pharaoh and his army were no longer a threat to them. You see, it wasn't enough for the Israelites to just be physically free. God wanted the Israelites to be emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually free as well. Free from worry and fear and anxiety. Free to truly live and breathe and experience and enjoy the land that God had promised to them. And so God orchestrated events so that Pharaoh and his army were destroyed right before their eyes, so that the Israelites would know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they did not need to live in fear. During the night, while the Israelites lay awake in their beds, trembling with fear, or perhaps tossing and turning in fitful sleep, God was at work, causing a strong wind to drive the waters of the sea back and turning the sea into dry land. The next morning, the Israelites crossed safely to the other side. But when the Egyptian army tried to chase after them, the waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. And the Bible tells us, thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptian army dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians, and so the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. The Israelites saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. They saw the great work that the Lord had done, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Even though the situation that they were in had felt impossible, God took seemingly an impossible situation and turned it around for their good. And now they could truly be free. Friends, I don't know what Red Sea you might be facing today, what seeming impossible situation you might be confronting you. Perhaps it's a medical diagnosis that you've received. Perhaps you're in a financial bind and you don't see a way out. Perhaps you're facing increasing responsibilities at work and at home, or difficult coworkers, or challenging or unstable living or working conditions. Whatever it is that you might be facing this morning that seems impossible, know that our God is a God of the impossible. If God can turn a barrier, an obstacle like the Red Sea, and turn it into a means of escape, then surely God can make a way in your situation as well. Earlier in chapter 14, Moses told the Israelites, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to keep still." Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to keep still. What an amazing God we serve. What an awesome, mighty, and powerful God God is. Ultimately, through Jesus Christ, God made a way for us where there seemed to be no way. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 says that we were dead in our trespasses and sins. Romans chapter 5, verse 10 says we were God's enemies. The sin and rebellion of humanity pitted us against the very God who created us and loves us. The situation that we were in seemed impossible. It seemed that all hope was lost, that there was no way that we could lift ourselves up, no way we could save ourselves, no way we could achieve our own freedom from slavery to sin. But Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says, "But God proves his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Christ hanging there on the cross, dying in our place, loved us and forgave us, his enemies, and achieved for us the salvation that we could never have achieved for ourselves. And we are no longer God's enemies, but now friends of God through Jesus Christ. God is the God of the impossible, the God who died for the ungodly, the God who loves even the unlovely. How do we live in response to a God who loves us with this kind of love? We recognize that our lives are in God's hands. We look to Jesus for our salvation and our strength. We place our trust in God and live into the freedom that God offers. Freedom from worry and fear. Freedom from the need to impress others or to prove our own self-worth. Freedom to take God at God's word, to rest in God's promises, knowing that the Lord will fight our battles for us. We only need to stand still.